Hello, everyone, and welcome to Neurocracy. Today, we're joined by Dr. Leandro Fosque, a postdoctoral fellow in the Center for Theoretical and Computational Neuroscience at WashU here in St. Louis. His research uses theory, machine learning, and neural recordings to study sleep homeostasis and understand how the brain maintains stable function while constantly changing through experience. Dr. Fosque, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. Yes.
Okay. So my first question for you is if you could introduce your research on sleep homeostasis and maybe talk a little bit about how your background in physics is shaping the questions that you're asking about the brain.
Yes. So the how I came to sleep, to try to understand sleep, comes from the idea that many people have heard the word criticality. Perhaps you have
Oh yeah, if you want to
your
explain like what
interview
criticality
with
means.
Raf.
Yeah.
Yeah. So criticality is this framework that has been proposed uh, for about 2 decades already, or a bit more than 2 decades. Um, More, but in the 2003, John Beggs and Dietmar Plens came out with this paper that showed neuronal avalanches, neuronal activity propagating in what we call a scale invariant form. Now, what does that mean?
Right.
This means that activity throughout the brain propagates in all possible scales. You have very tiny clusters of activity, very large clusters of activity, and anything in between. And and the reason why this was proposed before it was found experimentally is because at that point is where you maximize information transmission and many other benefits for computation. But a question remains after that. No? So you say, okay, yes, the brain may be near this regime or at this point, uh, but how does it maintain itself in that regime? That is one of the questions that would come out from this research. And if you look at many biological systems, these are systems that dissipate energy, consume energy, and try to maintain certain stability. Uh, in order to maintain this critical regime, you have to be able to control for that dissipation of energy.
Okay.
One of the proposals for sleep that came out very recently is that sleep may serve to restore this critical regime. That during wake, the network drifts away,
Okay.
and sleep serves to restore it to this critical regime. That is on one side. That is one of the interesting questions about sleep. The other one for me was during my PhD, what I was trying to do is to expand criticality to systems that are faced with noise, with changing input, and changes of other parameters in the network. And one of the questions that kept coming up is that how do you how do you maintain this stability?
Yeah.
So in order to uncover those rules, you need to understand the adaptive rules of neural networks. And you have many adaptive rules. You have synapses changing, you have excitability changing, you have network organization of excitatory inhibitory balance, and many other adaptive rules. Uh, but one that is very dramatic and is global is sleep.
Mm.
So that was what drove me towards trying to understand sleep as a global adaptive rule. And then you connect it to criticality, and then you realize that, oh wow, this opens way more questions than what you were trying to answer.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think a lot of people when they first like or just when they hear the word sleep, they think, oh, it's like, resting your body, like immune repair. But this is like a perspective that most people, I think, just the general population don't think about. Maybe like restoring your brain's computational power, like the information processing. So I think that's really, really cool. Um, I wanted to ask, like, what are some of the mechanisms in like this way of, or maybe like the mechanisms that you're proposing that sleep might kind of be able to restore this computational power? Are there any like processes that occur? Um, yeah, I'm just like curious about that. Yeah.
Yes, well, there are many that have been shown, have been proposed, and then shown experimentally. Classic replay, for example, to consolidate memories
Yeah.
that are salient during the day. There is this big hypothesis by Tononi and Cirelli, which says that during the day you have this strengthening of the synapses in the network uh, due to potentiation, and that drives the network towards an unstable regime.
Okay.
So during sleep, you decrease those synapses. You basically normalize the network in a way, and then you are refreshed, and your network is stable again. Uh, there are many of these hypotheses flying around. I do think that many of these are basically saying the same thing in many different ways. And none of them are quite right. None of them have the whole story. And what we have to do is basically put all of those together. What is it that they are saying that is that is founded in experimental evidence,
Mm.
and what do they say that we can falsify through experimentation?
Mm. Yeah.
To me, the most attractive thing would be to be able to formalize a theory of sleep that puts all these things together. And it may be that it's not quite criticality, but you want to be a little bit subcritical, or it may be something else. We will see. The experimentation will bear it out. But what I feel that has happened in the field is that we make it as we go, in a sense. No? We tend to define sleep in a particular way. We say, well, this is what EEG show us. Good. That is neuronal formulation of sleep, or definition of sleep. You have these waves during wake, you have these waves during sleep, and whatnot. Then there is the behavioral aspect. Now you say, well, this animal looks like doesn't move. Let me poke it, and I poke it, and now it moves, or it takes a little bit to move. And if I don't let it go to this, let's call it offline period, if I don't let it go and then I let it go, there is a rebound, no? Similar to the classic homeostatic state
Yeah.
of sleep that we see in slow wave activity. So that brings a question, and I think this is crucial. What do we mean by sleep? Do we mean just these offline periods, or do we mean this behavioral aspect, or do we mean the neuronal aspect? Do you need neurons to sleep? Um, do sponges sleep? And you can keep going and going and going.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, bacteria can show refractory periods. They can show online, offline switches, changes. Uh, so I feel that going back to the drawing board and starting, and with all the knowledge that we have now, we can start uh, basically trying to clean our thoughts and go to the fundamentals. And I think here is where physics can help a lot biology, but also biology can teach a lot to physics, because many of these adaptive rules and whatnot, they don't exist in physics. You're not gonna learn them in physics. Um, so going back to the drawing board, thinking this deeply from a fundamental theory may allow us to not get stuck in, oh, is this a little mechanism here for replay, and or is just cleaning waste, or it is
Hmm.
just criticality even,
Right.
now let's start over. We have the experimental data, we have all these theories competing with each other. Can we go back and think it from first principles? Can you derive it from first principles? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions that give you these online offline switches and these adaptive rules that later on they get ingrained in your DNA, with circadianity and whatnot. So yeah, that is what interests me in terms of studying sleep.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. When I was looking at kind of your work, I saw that you mentioned this tendency of us, or like just people in research in general, to go into like Plato's caves and kind of, allow our biases kind of cloud our perspectives. And I think that's very interesting to think about the importance of this interdisciplinarity, because that's how you come up with like original kind of ideas, but also like at the same time like understand what biases are kind of causing us to have like tunnel vision in a way. So it's very, very interesting. Um, Also, a few of the terms I came across when I was looking at kind of neuroplasticity and how they might be like relevant to this research and like the connection to sleep is Hebbian and homeostatic plasticity. I'm not sure if I'm saying Hebbian right, but if you could maybe like talk a little bit about those two like kind of types of plasticity and how maybe they kind of could be relevant in what you said earlier about the relationship between sleep and kind of computational power.
Yes. So okay, warning sign. No, I'm a physicist, so my knowledge of neuroscience is pretty embarrassing, but I'll do my best.
Yeah.
Um, Hebbian plasticity, what is understood and sometimes misunderstood, is that the classic saying, neurons that fire together wire together.
Yeah.
But that is not quite right.
Oh,
That
okay.
is not quite right. It's not because neurons that fire together, they get stronger. That would mean that they fire at the same time. Let's say there is a perfect correlation at the same time. And in reality, we have seen that there is this time dependence in the strengthening of the connections or weakening of the connections,
Yeah.
which means that there has to be causality there. Your neighbor has to fire before you fire in order for that connection to get strength.
Hmm.
And over time, there is this sort of synchronicity.
Okay.
But if you fire before your neighbor, then your neighbor fires, that connection will get weaker.
Yeah.
So you have this rule of strengthening and weakening connection. This is only one. There are other rules too, and it's a highly debated area still, because then you want to use rules like that to be able to implement them in machine learning,
Okay.
to say, oh well, this is how the brain operates and this is how the weights change, so let me apply it to machine learning and see if we can make better algorithms. But then the math is more complicated because you want to use uh, continuous continuous states, firing rates instead of spiking, for example.
Okay. I see. Yeah.
So on the Hebbian side is neurons that fire causally,
Okay.
parentheses, causally together, they strengthen together, they or wire together, no? Um, The other one, in terms of homeostasis, that is a bit trickier, no? Because homeostasis, it means that you want to maintain certain set point, whatever that may be. And there are many homeostatic rules, different homeostatic rules. Uh, for example, Keith Hangen, my PI at WashU, he showed fine rate homeostasis. So basically, what he did, he basically covered the eye of, or sort the eye of a rat or a mouse, I don't remember.
Yeah.
And what he showed is that the fire rate first in the visual area corresponding to the eye that he saw went down very rapidly because it's not getting information, at least not the same amount of information from
Yeah.
the visual input. But then later over time, the fire rate came back up after a few days. So it is like, okay, the system, the network is trying to come back to this
Oh,
set point, no,
okay.
of fire rate. You have something similar to, well, the network case, for example. If you have a network where, say, you have a great example is epidemics, for example.
Okay.
If you have an epidemic situation, let's put in something that perhaps people after 2020 they're more familiar with.
Yeah.
So if you have a bunch of people, in a party, there is a virus. You say, well, people are incredibly packed. The virus will spread very easily in there now. But now you say, well, is the same virus is there, but now the people get apart, get farther and farther apart, so the virus decay very quickly. If you move, and you can think of people as neurons, and the distance is like the strength of the synapses.
Oh, okay.
No? So now, if you say Hebbian plasticity, basically strengthen the connections, makes people pack together more and more and more. Information propagates very quickly, but now it overwhelms the network, no?
Oh,
Because
okay.
the connections are way too strong.
Okay.
And this is where the hypothesis of synaptic renormalization is the shy hypothesis. I cannot remember what it stands for, but it's synaptic homeostasis. It's one of the proposed theories for sleep, no?
Okay.
Which is this renormalization of the network.
Hmm.
Because during the day, during online engagement with the environment, these synapses get stronger and stronger and stronger. The system starts getting overwhelming, and now you go to sleep, and those weights, it's like during wake, people get together, compact, and then during sleep they got further apart, and so
Yeah.
on. You can think it like that, and that is a homeostatic process. Sleep does something like that. At least one of the things that sleep does.
Yeah. It's a very, very fascinating metaphor. Or, I mean, just the analogy there is very. I was trying to understand Hebbian versus homeostatic plasticity last night, and I was like, I thought I had it, but that like kind of explanation right there, that was beautiful. Like that's a great example. So I just wanted to say that. Um, so one of the things that kind of popped, or one of the questions that popped into mind as you were kind of talking about the analogy is maybe like the connection to the connection of your research to like seizures, for instance when we see like this kind of activity in large groups of neurons that's abnormal. So I'm curious if maybe like you've kind of thought about that connection too, and maybe how that kind of like seizures like might be like kind of related in a way to maybe like this point of criticality or like just kind of the active abnormal activity of neurons, or yeah, groups of neurons.
Yes, no, yeah, that is a great question because all these things are incredibly related, and some of the things, sorry, it's a little bit of a sideway, but
Yeah.
some of the things that are fascinating when you get to study complex systems, no? And the formulation of complex systems, you start seeing the relationship between completely different models or different applications of the theory, no? Like we were saying, epidemics and then and neural networks and so on. It, the case of seizures is basically getting these networks incredibly strong. You know? So now you start getting oscillations, which that is related to other things, no? Certain parameters of the network on top of the strengthening of the network.
Hmm.
So you get both. You need both. And this happens usually when you have two types of neurons. You can have these, like say excitatory inhibitory, or two species competing in an environment, no, wolves and sheep. You start getting oscillations. You can get oscillations. Uh, in certain part of the parameter, no? When you are tuning this parameter, the strength, let's say the average strength of the synapses, you tune this parameter. If you go to a very supercritical regime, you start getting oscillations, you have a seizure. If you go to the other extreme, activity dies out very quickly, and
Yeah.
the information doesn't propagate anywhere. And criticality is that sweet spot that gives you this perfect information processing or transmission. It is, if an engineer hears this, they will be like, "But what do you mean by information
That's
processing?"
funny.
So let's take it with a grain of salt
Yeah.
because it can get very nuanced there. But yes, that is essentially it. No? Epilepsy, you can. There is this area in dynamical systems that is called bifurcations, no? Bifurcation theory, which is basically when you have a particular state. No? So you have a particular state that is stable. A great example is do you skate?
No, I went skating a few like weeks ago for the first time, but yeah, so I have been skating. Yeah.
Okay, but the skateboard.
Oh, your
I'm
skateboard. Yeah,
thinking of.
yeah. Actually, I have a ripstick, so it's a little different. It's kind of
Yeah.
like a type of skateboard, but I definitely know like I understand skateboarding.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I admire skateboards or skateboarding people.
Yeah.
I could never do it. I tried it when I was a kid. It was
Yeah.
miserable. But there is this thing that is called dead wobbles. No?
Okay.
So you're on the skateboard. You're going in a straight line, and you're at constant speed. Okay, perfect. Nothing happens. Now you start increasing the speed, increasing the speed, increasing the speed, and at one point, your skateboard start wobbling, wobbling, wobbling. And if you keep increasing the speed, those wobbles get amplified and amplified, amplified, and then you fall and all
Oh,
that. Those are the dead wobbles. So what is the parameter that changed there? Is the speed. Huh?
yeah. Yeah.
So you just changed the speed. You kept going. You supposedly don't have any other variable that is influencing it. It's just a skateboard. That is a bifurcation. The parameter is the speed, and you were stable for a very long range of speeds. You were stable, but once you cross a particular threshold of the speed, you have these oscillations.
Oh, okay.
That right in between, that is the bifurcation, which
Yeah.
could be critical, could not be critical. In this case, it is a sort of critical bifurcation.
Yeah.
Um, but then you get oscillation. So you have now seizure state, and in the other extreme, you may have almost vegetative states, and in between, you have computational states that are more efficient and stable. So yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. I think I've heard of that phenomenon when it comes to motorcycles, where sometimes
Uh,
like at a very high speed, these motorcycles will like it's called a death wobble, I think. So
yeah,
because
yeah,
if if you fall off the motorcycle at a very high speed, chances aren't looking too good. So yeah. Actually, so another question that kind of popped into my head earlier in our conversation, but I've been kind of saving it for the right time, is I'm curious. So we're talking about like neurons here and neuronal like networks, right? But one of the things we haven't talked about is the role of like glial cells. So I'm curious if you kind of like ever thought about how glial cells might kind of play a role, a hidden role perhaps. Because I know that, especially when I first started studying neuroscience, I was surprised to hear that glial cells are actually like more kind of common than the neurons themselves in the brain. So one of the things that I always like to think about is maybe how the role of like glial cells might be relevant in whatever it is we're talking about when it comes to the brain. So,
Yes, okay, that is a fascinating question, and I don't think it gets as much, how do you say? People now it's changing. The field is changing. People are paying more attention to glial cells, I
yeah.
think, and for two reasons. On one, we had, I don't know, this obsession with the neurons as because they are the ones that are
Yeah, it's a
firing and we
buzzword. I
can
mean,
measure
yeah,
them, yeah,
yeah,
very
yeah,
easily.
yeah.
A glial is hard to measure. How do
Right.
you measure this the activity propagating through a glial network? That is tricky, and I think now we are developing those tools. So the field is shifting a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side, there are proposals like my other PI, no, Shinong Cheng. He proposed, I don't know what year was it, but a few years ago, glial networks as contextual networks.
Oh,
They
okay.
they give you the context or they give the neural network the context of what is going on, and now the neural network can compute better, depending on the context.
Yeah.
That is on one side. That is, I think, is being implemented now into the machine learning
Oh,
and
wow.
AI
Cool.
community.
Yeah.
Um, it's in baby steps still, but
Yeah.
it's being implemented. In terms of sleep, and I'm sorry, like I don't know much about the neuroscience of it
Oh,
and the
that's okay. It's okay.
the physiology of it, but I do think that because of the glial cells can connect to so many neurons at the same time, one glial cell, one astrocyte, let's say, can connect to so many, they're able to have more of a global or at least a wider regional
Hmm.
influence than many neural networks. You know?
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I was wondering is that could the glias be the a glia network be the ones that are uh, sensing the error, the
Mm.
computational error in the
Okay.
network that the error signal, no, that says, okay, now this is failing. Say the network is getting into this supercritical regime. It's time to go to sleep. So
Interesting. Yeah.
integrate the error and somehow bring it to the architectures of sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm talking when I'm talking about sleep, I'm talking of the homeostatic perspective of sleep. You have the circadian perspective of
Right.
sleep,
Right. Yeah.
which that is hard coded in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm referring to the homeostatic part of sleep. So yeah, I do think, and
Okay.
I would love to understand that much better.
Right. Yeah.
Is and I wonder, yeah, I wonder because the communication between glial cells is much slower than neurons.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder if some sort of network like that, understanding sleep, considering glial cells, could give us a hint of how organisms that don't have neurons sleep too.
Mm. Yeah.
Could shine a light on that. Um, but yeah, uh,
Yeah. No, no, I think that's very interesting kind of like theory, I guess, that you threw out there. I know like parts of that might be proven, parts of that not proven, but especially like when it comes to astrocytes, I know that I have a neuroscience competition in a few weeks, so a lot of this information is like fresh in my head. So I know like astrocytes, they're regulating like a lot of levels of neurotransmitters. So I'm also curious, like, and I believe they have gap junctions to kind of communicate with each other, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, don't quote me on that. But I know they regulate especially like the potassium levels and like glucose recycling, etc. So they're playing this big like role in the kind of like the interstitial space there. So I'm always like really curious to see how, the astrocytes might like you said, have the ability to do a little more than kind of is apparent or like kind of listed in the textbooks. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah. Um,
And
oh, yeah.
they're the majority of the cells in the brain too.
That is true, right? So
Yeah.
that's gotta offer some sort of hint there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this question is a little more creative, but I'm a big kind of advocate for like believing that our hobbies can, play a very positive role on what we like to do like academically. So this weekend I'm actually going to a conference with Dr. Herzog will be at the conference in Florida, Society for Research on Biological Rhythms, and I'm actually presenting a poster I did or a research project I did looking at Rubik's Cube records and their time of day association. So I'm excited to do that. And the fun part is that I love Rubik's Cubes and I compete and all. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I saw that you play the guitar, and I thought that's super cool. I actually might want to get into that this summer, but I was wondering if you think that playing the guitar and kind of appreciating the structure and rhythm of music, kind of influences your perspectives and research, perhaps, and maybe or just however it influences you academically. I think if you think that it's had an influence, I think that would be interesting
No,
to talk about. Yeah.
yes, no, it does. It it is hard sometimes when you have too many interests,
Yeah. Yeah.
because the day has only 24 hours,
That's true,
and you don't
unfortunately.
know what to do, how to manage that.
Hmm.
But what I do usually, and how music helps me, is that if I'm working, and let's say I'm working, say 2 3 hours straight, and I need a tiny break, grab the guitar, I play something, and it is it refreshes me. It's kind
Yeah.
of like it resets me to be able to focus again. That is on one side. On the other side is uh, I don't know. There are things that I don't think there are people, there are scientists, physicists that they will tell you, well, yes, I play this instrument and I have studied how waves affect this particular, or the wood affects the resonance and blah blah, and they get very deep into the science of their instrument. I don't go in that direction.
Okay.
I go in the direction that more about the feeling of
Hmm.
it. And it kind of separates in a way these two worlds in which I just enjoy playing and I am obsessed with playing
Yeah.
music, and learning music, but it's not that I'm gonna get obsessed into the science of it.
Okay. I
I
see.
have these two different worlds. I like also to train Muay Thai, for example, and
Yeah, I saw that.
uh,
Yeah.
I don't think sometimes I may get into, okay, what is the best strategy, because it's a little bit like chess,
Right.
sparring with someone. It's like, okay, if I do this, what will happen, what the other person will do, etc., etc. um, and yes, I don't know, with guitar, on one side, because I'm from Argentina, and this is how it started really. When I started my PhD, and I was missing Argentina, and I found a very old guitar, terrible guitar. It
Oh,
was destroyed, but I started learning by myself,
okay.
playing a few songs from my area in Argentina, which is called milonga. It's a gaucho rhythm.
Okay.
And that is what helped me a lot throughout grad school. And later I kept going and going and going and getting more intense and learning more, and then making my own arrangements, some compositions and whatnot.
That's cool.
So it, you know, it-
Yeah.
you find what you love, and you keep going, and when you realize, okay, you have achieved a lot.
Yeah. It's funny enough, as you were joining the interview today, I was actually kind of just playing with the cube because it also refreshes me. I think probably in a similar capacity to how the guitar helps kind of fresh you. I wonder if that's restoring us to our point of criticality.
Maybe.
But
Well,
yeah.
we can do that experiment. We should do EEG analysis
Yeah.
on that.
Actually, yeah, I remember when I was a lot younger in middle school, I really wanted to see how doing the cube affects the kind of rhythms in the brain. So, yeah, it's kind of been a childhood dream of mine because I
The,
don't think it's
the,
been done, but yeah.
there was in last year SFN, in San
Oh,
Diego. There were a few posters that were trying to do. They did EEG analysis on people playing instruments and also during meditation.
oh,
Um, uh, I don't remember the results, but it it was
okay.
cool that people were doing it. And
Okay,
I
interesting.
wondered, the comparison if you are going to, I don't know, do science for certain amount of time and then do music or meditation, how does
Yeah.
the brain activity change?
That is cool, actually. I'm glad to see people are going that direction. I think, yeah, I might actually after our interview, I might actually look into see who those people are.
Yeah.
But yeah. So for my final question, this is more like future looking. I was curious, like, what kind of questions are you most excited to kind of tackle in the next couple of years in your field of research, or maybe outside of your field of research? What are you excited about also? So yeah.
Yes. So my path has been a little bit like a random walk, a little bit chaotic. No, I started with astrophysics and then went to uh, did a little bit of high energy physics, and during my undergrad, I did a bunch of different things: mathematical physics, plasma physics, and galaxies and whatnot.
Wow.
So I'm trying to find still what is it that. Um, if there is like just one path. A lot of people tell you, well, I thought about sleep when I was 14 years old, and since then I've been in that direction. Uh, I'm not like that.
Yeah.
I find problems that I think they're very interesting, and try to tackle them. But what I'm most driven by is for organizing principles, frameworks that are able to explain much of the phenomena and much of the phenomena that we see in many different um, how do you say many different uh, problems. Like for example, again, going back to this idea of complex systems, that you can apply a formulation for epidemics and you can apply it for brain dynamics and so on. No? So you can abstract it and you can find a framework that ties it together, that may indicate that there are these organizing principles in nature, and perhaps it cannot be other way. It cannot be other way that you have these power laws in forest fires, in neuronal activity, in plasma physics, in you can keep going and going. So those are the things that drive me. I would like to be able to understand adaptive complex systems in a deeper way, trying to find formulations, symmetries, and and perhaps I don't know. Perhaps we have to go back to mathematics and try to derive the rules from there, like we have done in physics many times. So
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think having like that path where it's not in a straight line is always very interesting. You know, you never know where you're gonna stop or keep
yes,
going. So I think that's super cool. Especially as I go to college next year. I'm also hoping to kind of like understand my interests better, especially I'm planning on hopefully taking like interesting classes and not just, like only biology, only neuro classes. I hope to, kind of like broaden my interests a little bit as well. So on that note, Dr. Fosque, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real
thank
pleasure
you.
talking with you, and this is probably like the most intellectual conversation that I've had on this podcast. Generally, we don't go into like the science too much, but this is very interesting because you're able to use a lot of kind of analogies to desimplify some of this stuff, which is obviously very, very complex. So thank you for being able to do that and help make the science understandable.
Thank you, Sanjay.